Well, everyone, welcome back to the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. Happy New Year and still Merry Christmas, by the way. It is still the 12 days of Christmas. I will continue to ride that bandwagon until it is finished. But until January 6th, it is still Christmas. We still celebrate that. And in the Christian calendar, we'll go into Christmastide as we prepare our hearts and minds and souls for the Lenten season. I thought a very appropriate way to start out this new year would be to have my wonderful friend and a friend of the podcast, Pastor James Haldane, back on the show. So he is with us again. Pastor James, Happy New Year and still Merry Christmas to you, buddy.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you very much. We texted it. We kind of had a break. You've been on a break, and we've been able to put this podcast together in like 24 hours, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you for making the time. We talked about it just briefly in the pre-show kind of meeting. Just for everyone out there, just a recap. Your Christmas season go well overall for you and your family?
Yeah. Great Advent, focusing on the names of Jesus as revealed through Isaiah. And just capped it off with a pretty traditional candlelight and carol service, talking about the name Jesus and the name Emmanuel. And as I so often do, a very evangelistic sermon, really. Like,
yeah,
our response is to be like Mary and Joseph and the shepherds, personal, quiet, reverent, and also go and tell everybody and watch how God uses that to revolutionize people's lives.
Those themes and expanding upon that, I love hearing that, because that's really what is the Christmas season. What is our response? Like, I mentioned this a lot of times on this podcast and in our personal relationships, and how you and I have interacted over the years, is really getting down to our motive and purpose. What is the point? What does this all mean? And if it's not calling us to do something, if it's not, transforming us, I said it on Christmas Eve to my church that if you do not go away from these services at the time of Advent in awe and majesty and wonder at what the Christ child has come to do, like, dare I say, you have missed the whole point of this Christmas season. And so what you're talking about, like, what's our response to him? And that's going to be kind of our topics tonight, which is really, it's Christology. For those of you who don't know, that is the theological understanding and beliefs around Christ and what he came to do and what his death and resurrection signifies. And then a term that many of you probably have not heard before is orthopraxy, not orthodoxy, orthopraxy. And what that means is, like, what is the proper way that we practice our faith? So those are some academy type language that just basically mean, what do we believe about Jesus and how do we practice our faith properly and not do so in vain? And the reason why I bring this up is because of the Christmas season, because in my opinion, James, and maybe you can correct me or fill in the gaps here, I truly believe that Christmas and Easter are so intertwined, yet they almost get lost sometimes in our Christian calendar, because for me, it's like, if I'm not celebrating or anticipating Christmas, I'm celebrating or anticipating Easter. And it's because of those two holidays and how intertwined they are. Christmas is elevated in its speciality because of the Easter story and the fact that when Jesus died, and what we celebrate on Good Friday, the reason why we can say it's Good Friday is that it's not the defining and culminating moment of Holy Week. It's because of Resurrection Sunday. We can look at Christmas as something that is glorious. We're not celebrating or commemorating Christ's advent or incarnation in vain. Rather, we are doing so because of the resurrection. And do you think, I mean, I hope that obviously that'll make sense to you, but do you think, like, looking at Christmas in the same light as Easter and tying those two together is a practice that's worth doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, for my first, I don't know, my first few years as a pastor, then I wasn't the primary preaching pastor. That just started about a year and a half ago, but I used to, like, in my head, try to separate those two things. And so, like, at Christmas, we're only going to talk about what happens up until the birth. And at Easter, we're going to talk about, and it's easier to do at Easter because it's like the culmination of Jesus' earthly ministry. Arguably, there's some really important stuff that happens after the ascension, but or between, after the resurrection, I guess. Yeah. And so that's still earthly ministry, but you know what I mean? Anyway, and like I just I reached a point after like trying to just really focus in on just that one story at Christmas time particularly. I reached a point where I was like, what am I doing? Like he left heaven and came to earth to be born as a human and live as a human without sacrificing any of his deity so that Easter is possible. So like why would I try to just stop there? It's not the beginning of the story, but it is a linchpin in the story. And to just focus on that middle part, I think takes away from Christmas. And I love at Easter pointing back to the Christmas story because it is because he came the way he came that Easter is even possible, that Friday is
Yeah.
good, that the resurrection is a miracle. Because if he was just like a spirit that appeared as a man, like some believe, then there's no miracle at the resurrection. It's just a spirit doing what a spirit does.
Right.
And then there's no hope in bodily resurrection for us. And so, Christmas and Easter are necessarily intertwined. And so, like my whole Advent series this year, when I was talking about Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, I talked about the cosmic nature of that through the cross. I said so often we need to look um, through the manger, through the cross to the empty tomb, like through the manger, through the cross to the empty tomb, over and over and over again, because um, we have a habit in our culture of looking at just the cross. Like it's all about the cross, focus on the cross. Well, no, like it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's the manger is not the beginning of the story, but it is the cross and the manger and the empty tomb are all so intertwined that I imagine when Easter rolls around, I'll probably call people's attention back to Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't adhere to all of like dispensationalism teaches, and for those dispensation, it's the idea of eras or God interacting with humanity in different eras. You know, the Christmas story, the Bible, all 66 books is an entire narrative, but it is interlaced with these dispensations of God the Father, God, God the Son, and then God the Holy Spirit, and how he has
Mm-hmm.
interacted with humanity, all kind of formulating back into, this idea that something it's going to all be made new again, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
ultimate goal, that's the ultimate end plan. And yet what we see at Christmas is not, I mean, this was part of the majority of the first heresies in the early church, from 2000 years ago, is who was Jesus? What
Mm-hmm.
did he come to do? Was he fully God, fully man? Was he just a spirit, and then that appeared to look like flesh, so he only appeared to have died? Was he just a man, and then his followers perpetuated this myth that he actually resurrected, and they were basically certified insane because they didn't
Right.
want to go, their legacy, they were just so narcissistic, they wanted their legacy to be that they were these great stewards of faith. Like, what these were the questions that we wrestled with for, once you get John's revelation in 95 AD, from then on until we get our New Testament in 367, there's almost 3 centuries of this person who is Jesus, which is actually the question, I believe, cosmically, that God will ask of every person, and that separates every person, is what have you done with my son and this gift of salvation? What have you done with him?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can see this in the Psalms. You can see this idea, and David is actually prophesying. Like, David knows. He says, I say to my Lord, at my Lord, and in the gospel message, the Pharisees ask him, like, well, who is David referring to? And it's like, well, if he's calling him Lord, how could he be his son? And
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is like, David recognized even that
Mm-hmm.
there was going to be
Mm-hmm.
somebody from his bloodline that was going to come after him, that was going to fulfill this. So, like, even the whole story of the son is seen all throughout the Old Testament, which is one of the things that I wanted to discuss, was this eternal nature of the Son, eternal nature
Mm-hmm.
of Jesus. And this is no more so talked about outside of what you see in Jesus's words in the Gospels, in the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, for those who don't know, scholars remain very much in hot debate about who wrote this book, but the
Mhm.
entire book is a Christological defense. It is, this is who Jesus was, here's what he came to do. And if anyone would like some passages to look up, just to follow along here, Genesis 14 is where I'll start. But then if you want to look at Hebrews 1, Hebrews 6 and 7 in its entirety here, like this is going to be the basis of this. But Hebrews is a very peculiar book because Hebrews starts out by saying, God has spoken to our ancestors through the prophets, and these latter days he has spoken to us through his Son. And the reason why that the Son can be trusted is because he is eternal. He is not like the angels. He's not like man. He was made higher than all of those things, and he sits down at the right hand of the Father. For those of you who know a little bit about the church and its liturgy, regardless of what tradition, you recognize that type of language is right in our Apostles' Creed. The idea that Jesus ascended and he goes into heaven, he sits down at the right hand of the Father. And this whole notion of Hebrews then goes on to defend Jesus' sacrifice, which is so beautiful. And this is actually a message that I preached at Christmas, is that Jesus is called this high priest, and they use a name. They call back this reference, the author does, to this gentleman by the name of Melchizedek. And you have to go all the way back to Genesis 14, where you get Abram before Abraham is renamed into Abraham. He fights this battle, he fights this king, and he defeats him. And when he comes back, this gentleman by the name of Melchizedek meets Abram out and actually provides his troops with bread and wine. It is said of him in Genesis 14, verse 18, that he was priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. This is very critical for those who might not understand this. For Abraham, Father Abraham, this all the children of the promise. This is what Paul writes to the church in Galatians in chapters 3 through 4, that us Gentiles, we are heirs of the promise given to Abraham, and it was Abraham's faith that was credited to him as righteousness. It was not the law. That's what Paul's talking about in Galatians. What this means, that Abram, in response to this gift of hospitality from Melchizedek that he tithes to him, is a recognition that Melchizedek is higher than
Mhm.
Abraham in the priestly order. And so when the author of Hebrews says Jesus in the same order of Melchizedek, and what I love, what you see this in Hebrews chapter 6, what you end up getting is that it says in the Greek word used here as prodromos, that Jesus himself goes as a forerunner before us, a forerunner in the Old Testament. This understanding that it's a king's messenger. He lays out, he goes before to announce good news, to kind of take a survey of the situation in order to report back, but he's going as an assembly ahead of the king to either announce good news or lay out the foundation of what's to come. And Jesus then, as the high priest, goes into the temple, and verse 7, or chapter 7 rather, expands upon this more, but he goes beyond the curtain. And this is very important. I would love for you for those of you who are with us, chapter 7 in Hebrews, starting at verse 23. This is such beautiful language. It says, Now there had been many of those priests, okay, like this gentleman Melchizedek and other people, okay, other humans. What this is saying is, now there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. I love this. He's just saying because they were human and they died. I love this. Because Jesus lives forever, okay, he's the eternal Son, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. This is incredible. It's saying that Jesus is a high priest. He lives forever. So it wasn't just he resurrected, just like maybe all of us would in the end of the resurrection, that, yeah, we know we got eternal life coming. That's not what this is saying. He has lived forever. He is from the ancient days, is what our Psalms talk about. This idea, or excuse me, what Micah chapter 2, I believe, says, is that he is from the ancient of days, this Son, this Messiah that's coming. He lives forever, and therefore, because he lives forever, he is able to save completely those who come to him, and he has a permanent priesthood. So what are priests? Priests in the Old Testament and all the way up until Jesus comes on the scene, before those Jewish people are then Messianic Jews, or forsake their Jewish ways to become full on Gentiles. A priest's whole job was to be a mediator between God and man. They had to follow very strict rules. They had to offer sacrifices first for themselves, by the way. They
Mhm.
had to sacrifice for themselves and then for the people. And Jesus, what this says is a forerunner, he goes beyond the veil. He goes into the holiest of holies, like where the Ark of the Covenant was, where you actually make yourself right before God. You welcome his presence, or you, in this case, in the second century Judaism, Second Temple Judaism, they go to then offer sacrifices. Jesus goes behind enemy lines, in a sense, if I can use that language without committing heresy. He he lays his life down only to take it up again. Remember, he mentions that to his disciples that it's not doing out of obligation. He doesn't do it because he feels guilty. He doesn't feel bad for us. He's doing it because it's the Father's will, and it's the Father's will that we be reconciled to him. He willingly lays it down only for it to be taken up again. And because he lives, he does not have to come back and do the sacrifice again. We don't have to do this every Christmas, every Easter. We're like, well, Jesus, your blood's run out. That's not it. And so when the temple curtain, that veil, is torn in two, and the high priest says, surely this man was the son of God. It's a twofold thing. Yes, the curtain temple, now it's separated. We have a new dispensation, the Holy Spirit. Everything is now made among us. There is no holiest to holies. God is made everywhere. But Jesus himself, who was the spotless lamb, he goes into that inner and holy place and lays himself down. It's incredible because he is that high priest, like the order of Melchizedek, somebody who's higher. And as this is given to anyone who doubts Jesus's messiahship, this whole letter of Hebrews is saying, let me tell you who Jesus really did. That is the message that we celebrate at Christmas. That's how they fold into one another, James, in my opinion. Sorry, I went on my soapbox and actually preached here. For the listener's sake, they might not have ever heard that. As you listen to my ideas here, I'm curious what critiques or maybe context you have to add, and maybe, piecing these, looking at from Genesis to Micah, from our Psalms with David, now to Hebrews, from the Gospels. Like, this is all one continuous story. This is why the Christmas season is so beautiful in my mind.
Yeah, I don't have any critiques, um, corrections or anything like that. I really don't have much to add to that because you're actually not actually. Absolutely. That's the word I meant to say. Actually, as though it's a surprise. My
Wow.
bad.
Yeah, congrats.
Well, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Here's what I will say. It's funny. I was just talking to our daughter Mackenzie about this earlier today. She's in a group text with youth group from our church, and she was like, "Hey, I'm trying to figure out what book to read in the Bible next, just as a part of my devotional. What do you recommend?" And one of the things that, and so she asked me, she's like, "Here are the books that they suggested. What do you think?" And so I just kind of gave her my commentary overview on each book in terms of like, well, here's what it's about, and here's how I find it in terms of like difficulty or whatever. And one of them was Romans, and I
Oh,
always
yeah.
I always lump Romans and Hebrews together because for me personally, those are two of, if not the two hardest books for me to read and understand in the New Testament. And like even with Revelation in view, and I think I kind of give myself a pass on Revelation because it's apocalyptic literature, which is a
Yeah.
genre that no longer exists, and so it's supposed to be kind of mysterious. And so I don't get lost in there as much as I can get lost with my short attention span in Romans and Hebrews. And so I say all that to this is what I'm getting at. I think a lot of people have a hard time reading Hebrews. It's worded very technically. It's there like we were texting back and forth about these passages a
Yeah.
few weeks ago, and I read from like six, and I was like, I'm just going to keep reading until the end of this thought. And I got all the way into eight, and and then I was like, it's still going.
Yeah.
It's still going. So my response to you was like, okay, so at least all of chapter seven,
Yeah.
as it relates to the question that you posed to me. And so like when you have very much like Paul writes in Romans, right? So therefore,
Yeah.
therefore, like if one, then two, if two, then three, if three, then four, if four, then five, if five, then six. And that's
Yeah.
just it's like I told Mackenzie, I was like, it's like one really long thought.
Yeah.
And here's the irony. That's how I communicate. But when I have to read stuff like that, I get
Oh,
lost easily.
yeah.
And so my encouragement to listeners would be like, don't miss out on the treasure that is Hebrews, because it can be easy to get lost in there. Like this a priest in the order of Melchizedek is, or Chizedek, or Chizedek, if
Yeah.
you're, really enunciating like a Hebrew, then I it's really powerful stuff, and it's not all over scripture. It's not something you're going to run into in multiple places. Like
No.
Hebrews, especially these chapters 6 and 7, like they're so important for really understanding who Jesus is, as eternal, as fully human and fully God, as a priest. He is our priest and priest, prophet, and king, the three quote unquote offices of Jesus. But he's not a Levite. Like he's
Mhm.
not born in the order of Levitical priests. I actually had a text thread with a guy that I'm mentoring recently, and he was like, "So this is right after it's toward the beginning of Advent, so we start by reading Matthew, and Matthew begins with a genealogy, and he's like, genealogies seem to appear more in the Old Testament than the New Testament. Did they lose importance? Did they lose significance? Like, why is it that we get more about like people's heritage and family lines and all that in the Old Testament than we do in the New Testament? Great question, as somebody who's studying scripture and just really kind of starting to learn how to understand it. And I went to Melchizedek, and as like Jesus isn't our high priest because he's a Levite, because he's not a Levite. And so according to Jewish tradition, like he's not qualified to be a priest.
Mm.
Um, but when you understand who Melchizedek is, and his nature, and his primacy in our faith, in the Old Testament, as explained in Hebrews, which is, I mean, it gets its name because the author is writing to Hebrew believers. Like
Yeah.
he's connecting those generations, connecting those dots from the old to the new. It's just super important. And so there's so much about Jesus that is a mystery. And faith has to play a huge role in our attempting to understand, endeavoring over the course of our whole lives to understand who he is. Um, but Hebrews is a huge tool to help. So, all of that to say, like nothing really to add other than like you were like, read this yourself, and here's kind of a nutshell of these couple of chapters. Like, yes,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Awesome. Uh,
Listen to Michael.
and for the record, I need to correct myself too. Just fact check. Micah chapter 4 and Psalm 110 would be
Gotcha.
the other one. So Genesis 14, if you're following along going chronologically, Genesis 14, and then transitioning to Psalm 110, Micah 4, and Hebrews 1 is an introduction, and then chapters 6 through 7 are an incredible read on why we can look at Jesus as something different. Something again is this eternal device that Christ is, and the fact that why I mentioned earlier about this dispensations, and I talked with you, James, about this too. But like the three eras that really exist with the Trinity, I think are so beautiful. Is that
Mhm.
you have God who existing, let us make a man and our image. You have the spirit already hovering over the waters and separating the waters. You have God walking in the garden. Well, if if it's walking, who walks? Well, humans. Well, it's God in form. Like you have the Holy Trinity in Genesis at the very
Mhm.
very beginning.
Mhm.
And when God speaks to Abraham, and gives him a covenant of faithfulness, because he came 430 years prior to the Sinai covenant with Moses. You have God saying, I'm gonna pick these people up. I have a plan of redemption, but he's existing in this ark, and he's in the holiest of holies behind the temple curtain. And but it's not always supposed to be that way, because then they're all the prophets are talking about this one day this Messiah is going to come. Then the Messiah comes, and the God's place is now dwelling. The temple is no longer the temple; it's a temple in Jesus, who lays his life down. And the significance again of the temple curtain being torn is that that same spirit that Jesus promised the disciples, which we celebrate at Pentecost, is now made everywhere. And you have the Son making way for the Holy Spirit of this era that's defined the last 2 millennia of the church. We say the Holy Spirit. That was not a concept in Jesus' day before he said, hey, by the way, I'm going to go back to my Father, but I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to send you an advocate, is really what that means, that a helper of
Mhm.
this spirit, like the spirit of truth. He will guide you. Like, what an amazing thing to say, Jesus, I'm not going to leave you as orphans. It's one of the most parental, and it's like almost picture like a grandparent saying that to like a grandchild as they're sitting on their lap. It's like the amount of tender love that
Mhm.
Jesus has. And it's like, look at the tender love and mercy you see um and the book of Hosea, and
Mhm.
basically of Israel, who's betrayed the marriage bed
Mhm.
with God. They've committed adultery, and God says, "But I will still know you, and you will still know me." It's a very intimate thing, and you
Mhm.
see that love of the Father spoken in a human voice in Jesus, which would have just I would have loved anything to just
Mhm.
hear God of the universe say that with a human mouth. But
Mhm.
I will not leave you as orphans.
Mhm.
And now the spirit that's with us today is this new era. And I guess that's why I get so vitriolic about kicking against this whole theme of Christmas that's so dominated by the consumerism, because I feel like we just miss these points. Even as pastors, I think probably are sometimes tempted to not talk about this at Christmas time,
Mhm.
because maybe we want people to come back, and these messages are very hard to hear. John chapter 6, like, who's like, this is kind of hard. Who's supposed to, like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's accepting this hard teaching?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a formula for success.
Mhm.
Do you find, James, I guess, one, that like these messages are harder to preach, or at Christmas time for pastors, and then two, are you also like me, just glad to move on from this consumeristic side of Christmas in the West? I'm not talking about the spirit of like what Jesus is, like, absolutely not. I celebrate it year round, but like, those two questions, like, I'm curious where you stand on those.
Um, Personally, for me, it's not harder to preach about it this time of year. I really enjoy the opportunity to connect the dots from Christmas to these things. And I have a tendency to preach what, at least to me, feels like difficult preaching, like hard,
Yeah,
sanctuaries, churches should be safe places to hear dangerous messages. I heard that a long time ago, right? This should be a safe place to hear a dangerous message. Dangerous in that it calls you to lay down your life. Dangerous in that it calls you higher. Dangerous in that it calls you to do what just a small number of people in John 6 did. And that's not turn your back from Jesus and walk away, never follow him again, but press in and
yeah,
really understand what he's talking about. Um, so I love connecting uh, the story of Jesus' birth to the broader picture and some of those more challenging messages, because I think our tendency culturally in churches, not like secular culture, but in churches, is to just hyper focus on the prophecy and the shepherds and the
yeah,
journey and the pregnant teenager and the quiet divorce and the dream revelations in the angels and et cetera, et cetera. Like there's so much beauty in that. I'm not neglecting that like at all. But back to what I was saying earlier, um, I think there's a broader temptation to like just focus on that this time of year and then not focus on it at all the rest of the year.
sure, yeah,
And I used to work with a guy who lamented on a regular basis, not annually, but on a regular basis, right around March and then again in like July. Why don't we sing about Jesus' birth outside of December?
yeah,
Like this is such an important facet of our faith, and we only sing about. And he was just talking about worship music, but like we only sing about it at Christmas time. And I was like, I don't have a good answer to that question. I don't think there is a good answer to that question. other than it's just what we do. We've gotten ourselves in this rut. Um, and so, yeah, I love the opportunity to go, guys, listen, like,
Yeah.
do you see what a big cosmic, like from the beginning of history till the end of like this era until everything is made new? Like well, and then even then some, like what a big deal this is.
Yeah.
So preaching from Isaiah through Advent, I connected all four of those names of Jesus to the Old Testament and the context in which Isaiah was speaking, and then the future to which, or about which, Isaiah was prophesying. Um, and I wanted them to see that it was a word for the people at the time, them, my congregation. I wanted them to see it was a word for the people at the time, born out of Assyrian oppression, but also for all of us for all time. And so, um, I love those. I love
Yeah.
those opportunities.
Yeah.
And then, like, do I get to the point, your other question, do I get to the point where I'm just like ready for it to be done? Um, the commercialism and all of that. No, honestly, man, I love Christmas and
Yeah.
all of the hoopla. Like we don't take our stuff down, our decorations down until Epiphany.
That's awesome.
And so like we're the last house on the block with our Christmas trees up.
Yeah.
I do not have giant inflatable snowmen in my front yard. My next
Okay.
door neighbor does, God bless him. But we will never actually, from the outside looking in, other than a Christmas tree in the window, you wouldn't even know that we celebrate Christmas. I don't put stuff on the outside of the house because I don't want to take stuff down.
Right. Yeah.
That's the whole thing. But we watch the movies and we lean hard into the family traditions and we listen to the music and it's not like honestly super holy, all of that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
We I love me some Michael Bublé Christmas.
Yeah.
I do. I love Elf is my favorite Christmas movie, you know, like it's about
Yeah.
Santa Claus and a human raised by elves. I mean,
Yeah.
come on. I don't look for like preachable moments in movies like that. I just sit back and enjoy the
Yeah.
cultural ridiculousness of it. We did most of our shopping online this year for the first time. Like well, I'm a Gen Xer, so go to the store and pick out the things and put them in the cart. And
Yeah.
uh, but this year, man, we got a pile of Amazon boxes, 7 feet tall in our utility room that need to be recycled. But the couple times we did go out when it was busy, yeah, in about 20 minutes, I was ready to be done with the consumerism.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I the pop and circumstance too for me as because what you're describing, I guess, is not even what I'm angry at. It's more
okay,
of like the spirit of people pretending that they're having fun, even though they know that they're
gotcha,
miserable.
gotcha.
Because you know what, gosh darn it, I watch Christmas movies when it's not Christmas. I will listen to Christmas hymns when it's not Christmas
Yeah,
because of what you're talking about.
yeah.
And it's a shame too that culturally us Christians don't have as much pull as we once did, because when we did have that much, we didn't really do a whole lot with it. But I want it to be socially acceptable that we
Mhm.
sing and we talk about the 12 days of Christmas.
Did you
And
know? Speaking of that, sorry to interrupt.
it's okay. Yeah.
10,000 Reasons by Matt Redman, um, is a Christmas song. Light of the world, you came down into darkness. Um, uh, I can't remember the words now. Like, open my eyes, let me see, you know? Um, talking about like opening our eyes so that we can adore him. Um, and then the choruses are just like, bless the Lord, oh my soul. 10,000 reasons and then forevermore. Like, the words of the verses are about Christmas. I never made that connection before. It's an older song. It's probably 20 years old, but um,
There's no
some
way that's 20 years old.
yeah, it's got to be close to it. Um, Google can tell us if we look it up real quick. But anyway, so that's an example of a song that's about Christmas, but it doesn't follow the same kinds of chord progressions, or it's not written in the kind of key that makes it sound like a Christmas song, but it's about Jesus, the light, coming into the darkness. And there are some songs out there like that. And so like this Advent that occurred to I saw it on a reel. That's where I didn't
Hmm.
make that discovery about that song on my own. And it could only maybe it's just the first verse of that song that's about Christmas. But um I'm gonna go on a hunt this year, as I was thinking about that during Advent,
Hmm.
for other songs that are about Jesus coming that aren't necessarily old Christmas
Just
carols, but are that same message to listen to and reflect on all year long.
just kind of like that are hidden in plain sight, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah,
Okay,
because I
well, I
think that
like
stuff's
that.
out there.
I really do like that. I'm not. I'm like the opposite of a Scrooge. Like for me,
Yeah,
I feel the same way that you did. It's just sometimes it's hard too for me because Thanksgiving's really my big day off. And it's just Christmas. There's so much going on. It's a work day, and it's like it's hard for me
yeah.
sometimes to slow down, especially with my other job. But I'm glad. I'm very glad to hear that. A lot of this kind of a lot of our stuff, by the way, that we talk about, it revolves around this feeling of frustration. And I want to let you know too, as a bivocational pastor, I have a microscope in a way sometimes on me at the workplace that I work at, which is a completely it's run by great Christians, but some of the people that work there are certainly not. I mean, they're shop guys, so they talk like shop guys. They have worldly values. And that doesn't bother me one bit. Like it doesn't because I still want to love them and be the best coworker I can be. But I got to tell you, there's a couple of them that know that I'm a pastor, and this happened on yesterday, on Friday, James, and you're the first person I thought of, and I went, "There's no one else besides the pastor friends that I have. They will probably laugh so hard at this statement." So I am in the midst. The context is I'm trying to help this gentleman out. He has broken the tooling and we're going to pay for it. Now, I don't want to pay for it because frankly, it's not our problem, but he was upset that we didn't. So I was like, okay, I will be an advocate. I'll see what I can do. I personally don't want this to happen, but I want to be a person of my word. So we are going to pay for his tooling. Okay.
Mhm.
And he was like, well, I don't understand what happened. And I said, listen, I said, well, we'll get it taken care of. And that's basically how I said it. I was just
Mhm.
kind of like, I'm over this. And he made a comment to me that almost made me laugh out loud. And it was so funny. But I didn't want to say anything other than I just affirmed it. He says, for a pastor, you get frustrated rather easily. And I'm like, and I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I walked away and I just saw it. And like, as the day went on,
Mm.
the comment got funnier and funnier.
Yeah,
Because like, as if we're not allowed to be frustrated, by the way.
yeah, yeah.
That quote comes to mind that, effective leadership is you taught me is that, or I think you brought it up. Yeah. Leadership is
Definition
this.
of leadership. Yeah,
Yeah. Definition.
disappointing people at a rate they can
Yeah.
tolerate.
Yes, exactly. That is, that is like the most true statement I've ever heard. So yeah, we're constantly frustrated. I mean, think of Moses coming down from Sinai, looking at
Yeah.
Aaron and
Mhm.
worshiping the golden calf. Like, no, 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 you're not allowed to be frustrated. You know, like, so later the same day, 4 hours later, the same individual, for those who are in machine working, crashed his CNC machine.
Mm,
So he called up the wrong program and
mm,
crashed the machine and ruined it. Threw off the turret and he damaged the tool and the part.
mm.
Now, at a minimum, because I pay those, because I'm the purchasing guy there, it's one of my roles. I know that that's a minimum, a $1,200 visit, none of which is going to come out of his paycheck. And it took everything within me, James, not to look at him and go, "Do you want to know why I get easily frustrated?" Like, and I didn't say it. I
Yeah,
didn't. But
yeah.
it's like just this idea. I mean, like Jesus was frustrated. Now, what he
Hmm.
says in his anger is very related to frustration, but in your anger, do not sin. But
Hmm.
it's like, I guess I got to ask you tongue in cheek, James, are us pastors, are we not allowed to be frustrated?
No, absolutely not. When I got my ordination certificate, I handed in my angry card. Like I don't get to play the angry card anymore. Um, Super quick. Here I am to worship, not 10,000 reasons.
Oh,
I
okay.
cited the wrong old song. It was 2003, so that song is
Oh,
just
okay.
over 20
It's
years
like
old.
10,000
But
reasons. Like, there's
yeah,
no way I think that's that
yeah.
old. Like,
I
there's,
looked it up. I was like, oh no, I had the wrong song. Same era. That one starts out, light of the world, you step down into darkness, open up my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. Then it goes on to talk about the cross. And so it actually connects
oh, that's awesome.
Jesus coming light into darkness and to the cross. Anyway, yeah. So it's funny how um there's this seemingly common perception that because we're pastors, somehow we don't get frustrated or we don't get angry or we don't experience like normal emotions.
Yeah.
Um, or like we've been endowed with some sort of like extra dose of holiness, or you can only become a pastor if you are
Yep.
somehow more spiritually fit than like the average
A
Christian
robot,
or whatever. Yeah,
neutral.
like
Yeah.
my goodness. I I learned something about emotions a while ago that I'm no psychologist, so I don't know if this is absolutely true, but just the my experience in life has proven this to be pretty accurate. Um, there there's people will say I have said this a lot, and I'm trying to break the habit. People will say, "Oh, I'm not a very emotional person," if they don't cry, or if they
Yeah.
don't laugh a lot, or if they don't get real excitable about things. But like if you experience um tends to be either you're an emotional person or you're not, but you're not an emotional person in one kind of way, you know? So like I don't cry a lot. That is it's just the way I'm wired. There aren't very many things that bring a tear to my eye. There aren't a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like this idea, and I forgive me for interrupting, but I just want to expand just a little bit what you're saying. Like you're not like the fact that you can't be a certain way. I think is in a way it's very much related to how we as Christians we have kind of mystified the pulpit. This idea that we're people that are just above everything, and it's like we're hired we are called to a different standard because we have a different role than the majority of people, but those people have like spiritual gifts and talents that we don't have, and so I hear exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So it turns out I am a really emotional person. But the emotions that come out tend to be frustration. And
Yeah,
I actually have, well, frustration. And like, I'm a big laugher. Like I increasingly recently, throw my head back, like hand on my chest, guffawing at things. You don't react to funny things like that if you're not an emotional person, you know?
sure.
And so frustration, laughter, and then anger. And this runs in my family. We have this angry streak, and I'm really good at keeping that in check in public, usually. But I have moments at home where I just blow up about stuff, especially when I'm by myself. And yeah, that's not okay. I need to be healthier about that. So, be angry. But in your anger, do not sin. Thankfully, I'm okay. I just hop up and down and make an embarrassment of myself when nobody else is around. Anyway, pastors are people and we all have emotions, and some of us process them in healthy ways and some of us don't. And that plays out across the whole of Scripture. You look at the imperfect people that God chose to lead His people to help them learn what it looks like to honor Him and to live according to His, in the Old Testament, according to His law, and in the New Testament, according to His Son, in the law of love, which is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Like, and those people were a hot mess. Some of them very emotional. I mean, Peter, period.
Mhm.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
like so much there. But the fight between Paul and Barnabas, right?
Mhm.
Am I remember that correctly? Like they got in such a heated argument that they went separate ways. Disciples were at each other occasionally. Like Moses, I mean, he broke the tablets when he came down and saw the idol, the golden calf. I can't say that I blame him. I probably would have too. Um, and so if the people in scripture and like church folks, like they love to see that in scripture because it helps it, they go, oh, these spiritual giants, like these forerunners in the faith, they're they're human too, and they're
Yeah.
flawed too, and God used them in such powerful ways. But by golly, my pastor is supposed to be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Because but that's what happens when you elevate the office so much so it
Yeah,
becomes a celebrity that
yeah,
people become so disappointed
hmm,
when you find out that they're human.
yeah,
And it's like, if we are going to use the language of priesthood, who is the
hmm,
highest priest? We've already talked about it.
sure,
Jesus.
yeah,
That's it. The age long correct answer to any church question. It's Jesus.
Jesus,
So I really appreciate you saying what you're saying. I don't know of any pastor who has never been frustrated. And if they are, like, I don't know if they've
mhm,
been there very long because
sure,
if you're a
yeah,
pastor and you're understanding the role of shepherd, that
hmm,
is a almost sometimes a constant exercise in futility. They
hmm,
exercise all the time
hmm,
of like, I'm trying to lead my people in a way they don't want to go.
hmm,
Or I have an idea that gets shouted down, or or it's a good thing, or it's encouraged, but not everyone agrees. It's
yeah,
like there, and that's not, that doesn't define my experience as a pastor either. But there are frustrations because heck, there are frustrations that have nothing to do with the congregation. It's just this life happens when people
yeah,
die or choose different decisions. People leave the church, and it's like, yeah, I got peace before the Lord, but I am frustrated. But like, what am I doing then in my frustration? But it's just funny that somebody's like, hey, you get really frustrated as a pastor, as if the idea of having frustration is somehow like, ooh, you got me. But what would have been bad if I turned around and was snotty in return, or I wanted to
yeah,
say something I
yeah,
didn't want to say, or
hmm,
I shamed the individual because they made a mistake. That's what we're talking. That's the difference. I mean, there is such a thing as righteous indignation. Of course,
hmm,
there is. Jesus
hmm,
demonstrated that. You're going to see that in the upcoming season on The Chosen here, around Easter time this year,
hmm,
and so I I found it hilarious because I didn't take it too seriously. But there is a point though where if people know that I'm a pastor, but they also do not care at all, it's good to get a check every now and then and go, oh, wait a minute, like, am I off here? Because I'm not
hmm,
above reproach. And what happens though is once you elevate these positions to
yeah,
godlike status, you can't approach them anymore. They're
hmm,
unapproachable, and you certainly don't dare correct them because
yeah.
they're above reproach and above rebuke.
It's my wife Danny and I we've talked about this on multiple occasions. It manifests with my family, my siblings, particularly one brother, and I have three brothers, and they're all married, and so like one brother and his wife, and it comes from a place of absolute respect and love and a desire to honor us. And this is a family thing, but I think it just got stronger when I started working at a church and got the title pastor. They talk differently when they're around us compared to when they're not. They apologize if somebody says a swear word or just a crass word that might not be characterized or categorized as a swear word to everybody. Um, oh, we're sorry, and they don't talk about when they go out drinking with their friends, and they don't talk about going to casinos, and they don't talk about like whatever that doesn't align with our lifestyle because they know it doesn't align with our lifestyle, and they don't want to offend us. Before I became a pastor, there was a little bit of that, but not a lot because we were already pretty conservative. Like we didn't drink any alcohol and we didn't gamble and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. And it's not because we're legalistic or hyper religious. It's just we felt like God say that doesn't need to be a part of your life, and we're like, all right, well, if you said it, then we're going to obey it. And it was as simple as that. And this is not a criticism of my family. Like I love that they respect us that much and they love us that much that they want to honor our values. But it feels like we don't have access to their whole lives. It feels like they have to be guarded around us. And there are things that the rest of my family, two of my three brothers, one lives a kind of an hour and a half away from everybody, and we don't get to see him a whole lot. But the other two live close together. They golf together, they bowl together, they hang out together, they text each other. Um, the only time I'm in communication with my brothers is when I reach out to them. Um, and we have family get-togethers. It's not an exaggeration. And I think that a lot of that comes from this, well, he's a pastor. So, and when we hang out, we drink and we swear and we talk about this and we do these types of things. And that's not his thing. And it can't be his thing because, he's a pastor. And so, like, we laugh about it. And most of the time it is funny, honestly. But there is this like burden that comes with it. That's why it's so hard for pastors to disciple people. Like, that sounds so uh counterintuitive. And I'm a professional Christian. I get paid to follow Jesus. Like, again, okay, so Jesus was also sarcastic occasionally. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, right, right, right.
So, like, I get a pass. Um anyway, it's hard because as soon as people find out you're a pastor, like, they put a wall up and then they only present part of themselves because they feel like they have to behave a certain way because they assume that they're in the presence of some ultra holy person
Right.
or some ultra judgmental person, because holiness and judgmentalism in our culture are bedfellows.
Yeah.
And like,
Interlaced for sure.
yeah, like, and so that's a much more appropriate term than bedfellows. And so, like, I'm as much of a words guy as I am. I don't always pick the best word pictures. Um, anyway, so it's hard. That's all I'm saying. Like, it's
Yeah.
hard. And I started experiencing some of that with the people who were closest to me, my family, before I became a pastor. And so, like, to the people who are listening, like, the more you follow the Lord and the more you lay yourself down for Him, the more different you're gonna look than the world around you. I mean, if you're quote unquote doing it right, and you're
Sure.
denying yourself and you're embracing a lifestyle that is all about submitting to the Lord's will for your life, then you're going to look less like the world and more like the
Hmm.
kingdom.
Hmm.
And when people ask, and not everybody will, arguably most won't, but when people ask, like, "What? Hey, so what's with this change?" And you start sharing your testimony, like we pastors encourage you to do, don't be surprised when people start acting different around you. And not like you're going to lose all your friends. I mean, you might lose some, but like, they just feel a lot of times, like with my family, from a place of respect and honoring, they feel like they need to behave a certain way around you to respect you. And there's a huge tension in that. And it's hard in my experience, this may not be common, but in my experience, it then becomes hard to just, no, 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 like, you be you, like, you be yourself. There is no expectation from me that you change
Yeah.
anything because of what's happening in
Yeah.
my life. um and people go, yeah, 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 I get it. And they know you and they know your heart and they trust you and they do it anyway. It's almost like they can't help it. And I don't know, that's just hard. So, like, wah, wah. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
all of that, like, came pouring out of me as soon as
The- Well, that's kind of like the worst thing people can do if you're out there is like not be yourself around pastors. That's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
It's in fact it's very insulting. Now, if the I can understand, like James is mentioning here, if that person's an incredibly judgmental person. Now, people feel judged by without even words.
Yeah.
They say, well, he looked at me that way, and people can interpret. I'm talking if you're being really genuine, if somebody's being demeaning towards you and they're a
Mhm.
pastor, they're looking down their nose at you.
Mhm.
That's not what James is. He's not, that is not who
Yeah.
he is. And
Yeah.
that's not even close to who he is. So if you're going to alter your behavior because you're a pastor, like God can't work with people. Us pastors can't counsel people if we're just being lied to the entire time, if people
Yeah.
aren't even honest with themselves, or
Mhm.
they feel as if they got to do something because it's never sincerity, it's never genuine. And that's why for me, it's like I think the shop guys are hilarious. I honestly, it's one of my little things is I think when people use as what SpongeBob refers to as
Mm.
sentence enhancers, uh, I think it's sometimes hilarious. Like I'll be laughing until I want to throw up because some of those guys in my shop are hilarious.
Mhm.
And it's like it's rubbing elbows with people, real I say
Mhm.
real down to earth people every day that keeps me humble.
Yeah.
Um But when people like that also try to rebuke you and call you out when they have no biblical authority to do so, it's actually really funny. Last question for you,
Yeah.
before we get out of here. What would you say, James, is our role and the as pastors in the mystification process of our own platform and our own profession? What role have pastors played in saying, yeah, you know what, I am better than you guys. I am deserving of a much larger check. Do you see my social media influence? Or think, how dare you? How dare, do you know who I am? That type of, that no one
Mhm.
likes, but sometimes goes unspoken. Um, how do we play a role in that? And how can we not de-escalate? Give me a word there. How can we deconstruct? I hate the new age term deconstruct. So how can we abolish that notion and that practice?
The first thing that comes to my mind, um, well, I guess first couple things that come to my mind. First, like be authentically you when you are behind the pulpit, or like I so often say, beside the pub table, because that's how I preach, or you know, up there without your notes or whatever. Be the same person you are there as you are in conversation, as you are leading a small group, as you are running a meeting. Like you have to operate with integrity and just be the same person everywhere you are. Now, granted, my speaking style is different in different contexts. So, like, it's
Yeah.
funny. I was doing my sound check a couple weeks ago, and I must say my S is funny because I have to say so many words that have S's in them every Sunday morning, so my sound guy can get it dialed in just right. Like, um, and so like this is the last time I preached. I just make conversation with the people in
Mhm.
the room while I'm doing my sound check, and he was like, "Okay, this is great, but I need you to put on your preaching voice now." It was like,
Oh man,
oh, I
that's
do have
funny.
a preaching voice. Like I
Yeah.
project more when as soon as the sermon starts.
Yeah.
And it's not something I do on purpose. It's my teaching mode. And I was a teacher for 10 years, and it's just the same thing. Um, so I'm not necessarily saying like change the way you speak, but your person God gave you a personality, right? Um, it is something to be used um to uniquely impact the kingdom, because no personalities are like fingerprints. There's nobody in this world that is wired exactly like you. And so you have the opportunity to make a unique impact in the kingdom by the way God has wired you. This is very closely connected to when we read the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Soul is very closely connected to what we understand now as personality. And so like they're all unique, they're all special. So like don't deny that. So when you get up, when you're planning your sermons, for all the preaching people, when you're planning your sermons, um, plan it like you're going to be having a conversation with someone about the topic. That's my advice, right? Um, Plan it like if you were sitting down across a table from somebody and you were sharing a revelation from scripture that the Lord gave you. How would you talk about it? I'm manuscript, so I don't read my sermons, but I write everything out because I'm an external processor, but that is an internal process. So I need to put it on a screen, um, so I can just get all of the thoughts out. Because that very much also stream of consciousness is my most productive way to prepare. And I can't write like I'm writing an essay. I can't write like I'm trying to be fill in the blank pastor that I'm watching lots of shorts or reels from, or whose Instagram account I just chose to follow this week or whatever, because that guy or that lady, that's not me. That God hasn't wired me that way. He hasn't given me that preacher's voice. As there's a short list of preachers that I love and am hugely inspired by, and as soon as I try to start sounding like any one of them, I'm denying the personality that
Mm.
God has given me.
Yeah.
And people will pick up on that in a moment. Like if
Yeah.
I step up on that stage and I start preaching like Philip Mitchell from 2819 Church, like he's one that I'm watching a lot from right now. He is a like go get it, like preaching about like the need for us to reform the church and make the bride like submit ourselves to the Lord so that the bride can be as beautiful as she's intended to
Hmm.
be.
Hmm.
Um, but man, I do not preach like Philip Mitchell. I don't. Um, I I kind of wish I did, except that it would be to be completely different. So if I got up and I was like preaching like him and I was like grabbing a towel and wiping the sweat off my face because I'm preaching until I'm about to pass out, and then I went and had a conversation with someone after the sermon, they'd be like, wait a minute. The dude I'm talking to right now
Yeah.
is not the dude who was just
It
preaching that
speaks to this
sermon.
duality. It does this. It's completely
Yeah.
unrelatable.
Yeah. So you got to, whoever you are, be authentically that person
Okay.
wherever you're at. Like that's one. The other one, that the other thought that came to my mind immediately is be accessible. Like you have to be accessible. And when you're a church of 30 or you're a church of 50, like we are, it's a lot easier to be accessible, or it seems a lot easier to be accessible compared to when you're a church of, 1,000 or more. So like the
Yeah,
church I
it's
came
not
here
tenable.
from.
There's not enough
Yeah.
hours in the day.
And so, like, Bryce, the pastor of the church I came from, like, he did a really great job of making himself available immediately after services as often as possible. There are days that you don't have the capacity to like have 75 quick interactions in 20 minutes, like I get that. I especially get that. I am a fewer interactions that go deeper. Like that's how I tend to interact with people after
Yeah,
church.
for sure.
But even in a church of 50 people, after my first 3 or 4 months there, I had two or three different people come up to me and say, I've been wanting to connect with you after church, but it's just so hard to find you. We have one room. Like we don't have a fellowship hall. We have a sanctuary where people mingle afterwards in a foyer. Like that's it. And then some classrooms, but obviously I don't go in there after church. So like what do you mean? I don't understand. What do you mean you can't find me? Well, like I look and you're talking to somebody, so then I chat with someone, and then I look and you're not there anymore. And there you're over there talking to somebody now. Oh, and you're over there talking to somebody now. You should stand at the door and shake people's hands as they leave. And I was like, I'm not going to shake them out. Like I'm not going to encourage people to leave church faster. Um, so what do I do? Like I had to figure out a rhythm for our church that felt good and was consistent with my personality, how I'm wired, what I want to accomplish in terms of building fellowship and community at our church, to make myself more available to interact with more people. I have to deny myself a little bit that longer interactions with fewer people. Like I have to deny that a little bit on Sunday mornings so I can have interactions with more people.
Hmm.
And then I have to, and I'm working on this. I'm not great at it yet, but I have to build a more consistent habit of sending a text message or making a phone call or even sending an
Yeah.
email, like just a
Hmm.
light touch periodically that says, "Hey, I'm praying for you. Um, you came to my mind today. Just wanted to touch base and make sure everything's okay." Um,
Yeah.
just those little, and that's the shepherding part of
Yep.
pastoring, but you just have to be available when you're the pastor of a church of 30 people. That's probably fairly easy to stay on top of. On average, it's about one person a day. A church of 50 people, you're about two people a day, like on average. So that's not bad. When you're pastor of a church of 1,000 people, then you have to start delegating some of that responsibility. And
Yeah.
so, like, all right, all of the people in the church who have kids in kids ministry, how can we empower our kids pastor to be making those touches and to be visible and to be available and have him or her be the pastor for those families as opposed to the guy who preaches in the sanctuary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've tried to make that gain in that latter half of 2023. Every year I go before my board and we talk about things and it's like, how can I be improving?
Mhm.
And it's like, it's just another thing. And by being bivocational, it is still difficult, but
Sure. Yeah.
that was like one of the things that was actually asked at my December board meeting was, how can I be more approachable? And that was actually a
Mhm.
question I wanted to ask because I generally want to know the answer to that. A lot of it because of the motive that we just talked about is that I want people to be able to feel free that they can come to me. So your answer, uh, be authentically yourself. And then also be approachable. Both of those are rooted in humility and genuineness,
Mhm.
authenticity.
Mhm.
And what happens is we allow envy or jealousy, or we're telling God that I wish I had gifts of other people. It all
Mhm.
takes away from the calling that God gave us in the moment right
Mhm.
there. It's like, are you
Mhm.
telling me that I called the wrong person then, or
Yeah,
did I
sure.
not did I
Sure.
not equip you with the right gifts?
Yeah.
And so that would be like God's retort.
Hmm.
So I think keeping that in mind is perfect. Thank you very much for your thoughts on this today, James. I really appreciate our brotherhood, our friendship, our it's been great. We've talked about this personally that really our relationship was characterized and started when I started my first little ministry team leading when I was leading the young adult group at Jack's Naz. And that's where between you and Pastor Tracy, I wanted to be able to have Pastor Tracy be a mentor, but I wanted somebody, because there's boundaries, male, female, I wanted somebody who could, push me. And so I had both of you guys there, and our mentee mentor relationship now going into its ninth year is really just transitioned to a friendship. And lo
Yeah.
and behold, there's been a lot of seasons of life where you and I have either been thinking about the same thing, or we've been kind
Hmm.
of, dare I say, frustrated about some similar things, and we've been able to help each
Yeah.
other. So
Yeah.
to have you as a regular guest now on the show is very encouraging for not just me, but for the rest of our listeners. So thank you very much, bud.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. And it's, I mean, really, this is going to sound hyperbolic, but I don't mean it to be. It's an honor to be invited as a regular guest.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Awesome.
it's just great. Like, and I always, I've said this on here before, but I look at the email you send me with the topics and I'm like, did he mean to send this to somebody else? It's like when you were like orthopraxy, I was like, I'm really glad he explained that to the listeners because I forgot what it meant.
Oh my gosh.
So,
I love
oh
it.
yeah, that's right. I do know what that is.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you do.
So anyway, despite my feelings of inadequacy, I'm I'm grateful. Always
Oh,
grateful to be on here
well,
and
thank
just
you, because we need it.
yeah,
I
yep.
actually, I desperately need it. They don't want to hear my voice the entire time. So we'll have you back for February then,
Excellent.
as we
Yeah.
prepare ourselves for Lent.
Yeah.
Depending on when we might be in Lent by then, which I
Mhm.
think starts because Easter's a little bit. When
April
actually?
20th. I
Yeah,
think
actually,
it,
so Lent's late. I'm sorry. It starts
yeah.
in March. Um, it starts, my gosh, March 5th. That is so
Okay.
late.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be preparing ourselves for Lent. But in the
Mhm.
meantime, Pastor James, I appreciate you and your church is Eaton Rapids Church of the Nazarene.
Mhm.
And if you ever want some pastoral support, I can give you his email and he can answer even more, put more on his plate. Is there any places people can find you that you would want people to go to at all? Any links?
Uh so yeah, I mean, you seriously, you can send me an email. It's just pastor@eatonrapids.church. Um, our church, ER underscore Naz, I guess, on Facebook. We're on Facebook. And I'm on Instagram, but I hardly ever post, so there's no point in finding me on there.
I got you. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I will still say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all. And as we continuously sign off on the show, may God bless you and may God keep you.